What's up, everybody? Today I'm going to be filming my imbalance confluence video. Basically, what that entails is I'm going to teach you guys all about imbalances, how to mark them out on the charts, and then also how you can use it to benefit your trading. Like always, if you like what you see and if you learn anything, please consider giving me a like and subscribe. It helps me out a lot. Also, don't forget to go to my other socials like TikTok and Instagram. Go help me out over there. It's greatly appreciated. And come join my Discord channel because it's completely free. And I trade on there every single morning with y'all. And I'll answer any questions that you have about trading for free to my best ability. Without further ado, let's get into the video. All right, so here's kind of the definition, and I'll give you brief examples of what the fair value gaps are. So a fair value gap is a price range that price likes to use as support and resistance. So price will retrace into these zones and then use it for support or resistance, depending on bullish or bearish. Fair value gap is made out of 3 candlesticks. It is either the top of the first candle to the bottom of the third candle, or the bottom of the first candle to the top of the third candle, depending on if we're going down or if we're going up with those 3 candles. A bullish fair value gap has a second candlestick, it's bullish, and then the same thing but opposite with bearish fair value gaps is the second candlestick is going to be bearish. And we can expect price to respect these zones whenever we tap into them. So an inverse fair value gap is just like a fair value gap, but it's whenever a fair value gap gets disrespected, it turns into an inverse fair value gap. What this will look like on the charts is that bullish inverse fair value gap is basically just a bearish fair value gap. And then a bearish inverse fair value gap is just a bullish fair value gap. And I'll show you what that looks like whenever we start marking it out on the charts. But trust me when I say it's basically just the same thing as fair value gap, but just whenever it gets disrespected, we just switch, I guess, bias over the fair value gap. And then again, if price taps into this inverse fair value gap, we can expect price to respect it and continue in the trend. And last but not least, VPRs are definitely the strongest because they are just imbalances on top of each other. So fair value gaps and inverse fair value gaps that overlap. This bullish BPR will basically just be like a bullish fair value gap. And the same thing with the bearish BPR is that it just is basically a bearish fair value gap. And I'll show you what that looks like on the chart and how to kind of mark that out. Trust me when I say these are one of my most favorite confluence, if not my most favorite confluence. And if price respects the BPR, then we can expect price to reject it and continue in the trend. Here we are with some little examples real quick. We see that we have the 1, 2, 3 candles pattern stick right here, and the top of the first and the bottom of the third is where the gap is created, and we see that if price comes back into here, we can expect price to basically reject off and continue up. And same thing but opposite, the bottom of the first candle and the top of the third candle is where this gap is created, and we can expect price when retraced into to reject it. Okay, and now for a inverse fair value gap example, we see that this is where our bullish fair value gap was before, because we have the top of the first candle to the bottom of the third, and then we see that with this candle we disrespect it and close on the other side. So we got the closure below this bullish fair value gap, so it turns into an inverse, and if price comes back into the zone, we can expect price to reject and continue down. And then same thing on this bullish example, this was a bearish fair value gap that was closed above, therefore turning this into an inverse fair value gap. And so when price retraces back into it, we can expect price to reject it and continue up. Last but not least, the BPR. For the bullish example, we see that right here we get a inverse fair value gap because we close below this bullish fair value gap, so this turns this into an inverse. And then we see that we also get a fair value gap created, a bearish fair value gap. So we have a bearish inverse fair value gap and a bearish fair value gap that are created. And so because the bottom of this first candle and the top of this third candle is where this gap is formed, and we could see that this little yellow zone is the overlapping part of this fair value gap and inverse fair value gap. Basically, this is a high probability zone that price will reject because both of these are bearish and they're overlapping in this zone. And same thing with this bullish example. We have this bearish fair value gap that gets closed above, turning this into an inverse, but then also we form a fair value gap here because the top of this first candle and the bottom of this third candle forms a gap, and this overlapping part right here would be our BPR. Again, another high probability zone that price will reject and then continue up. All right, now we are finally on to the actual chart. We're going to show you some real examples of how price used fair value gaps and BPR to reject and continue into the trend. So first off, here we are on NASDAQ. We see that there's this number one candle right here, the first candle, second candle, and third candle. And we see that from the top of this first candle and the bottom of this third, there is a fair value gap that is created. So we see that this would be our fair value gap zone, and we see what does price do? Price comes in, taps into this fair value gap, and then continues upwards. So that is a bullish fair value gap. Again, on NASDAQ, we see that price comes in and then inverses this fair value gap right here because we get a closure above, and then we see that price retraces into it and then respects it and continues up. Again, that's a bullish example of an inverse fair value gap. For the BPR example, I'll show you right here, but we see that price comes and forms a fair value gap right here, right? And then this is inversed. So now this is an inverse fair value gap right here whenever price closes below. And then as we're making the move down, we create another bearish fair value gap. So now we have a bearish inverse fair value gap and then a bearish fair value gap. So two bearish imbalances, and we see that this little blue zone right here, price taps into and then respects it and then continues further down. That is an example of a bearish BPR. That'll be the end of this video. Thank you everybody who watched. I greatly appreciate it. I hope y'all learned something out of this. If I'm going to be honest, fair value gaps are probably one of the most crucial confluence to kind of know because I use them for bias and for entry. They're very helpful and useful to me. Again, like I said before, if you found anything or learned anything, please give me a like and subscribe. It helps me out a lot. Also, don't forget to go to my TikTok and Instagram and show some support over there. In my channel description, you can find my Discord, which is completely free to join. I host trading calls in the morning every single day, and I'd love to see you there sometime. That'll wrap up this video. Thank you everybody who watched again. Enjoy your day. See ya.